one of the most neglected aspects in the modern church of the Christian vocation is this notion that all the baptized are a priestly people. Now, once again, proper distinction, sacramental versus non-sacramental priesthood. But what is the essence of a priest? A priest isn't just a mediator between God and man. A priest is an intercessor as well. In bringing us to God, in a sense, the priest is that intercessor. Therefore, we, all the baptized, are to be intercessors on behalf of the created world. Now, that doesn't just involve prayer. Obviously, we pray for the created world. Our role, though, as capstone liturgical mouthpieces for all of creation, is to be intercessors precisely by offering God proper worship in mind, soul, and spirit, and offering to the Father as the capstone of the created world, this liturgy of the whole for all living things. And then beyond that, and actually caring physically for the physical environment. We are acting in a priestly way.
Okay, so here's what my wife and I debate about.
Okay.
We're the priests, we must effect something, and yet you were saying something that's very Thomistic, that the sheep praises God by its very essence, right?
Right.
So how do we actually change something in the creature? What's actually being effected?
Well, I think that it's being effected more in terms of our orientation in ourselves, in our souls. In other words, salvation is corporate, and existence is far more corporate than we think that it is. We are implicated in one another. And therefore, in aiding, I'm going to be very Thomistic here as well, in aiding a sheep to be more sheepy, I'm not only aiding that sheep to be what it is, but I'm also in some sense now participating in that.
Yeah.
And in participating in it, I am able to take it somehow into myself, into my soul, and offer it up to the Father. So in a sense, something is being effected in terms of the human disposition towards these things. Now, I think there could also then be a sense, an analogical sense, in which something is being effected in the creature itself. But I think that's going to have to wait for the eschaton for us to see what it is that changed internally, say, in a sheep, because we were taking its sheepiness into ourselves, if you want to put it that way, and to offer it to God. Because of the sheep's connection to us spiritually, because we're all implicated in one another, something has to have changed within that animal as well.
Yeah.
And we will see what that is in the eschaton, and we will see the connections. I like to joke with people, and it's not so much a joke because I kind of believe it strongly. I'm a big dog lover, and I've had dogs my whole life, and I firmly believe that I will see my dogs again someday. I don't know if a dog has an immortal soul and all that kind of stuff, that Thomas talks about. But because the dog is implicated in me, I'm implicated in the dog. And if I am going to go to heaven as me, that means that everything I've ever come into contact with in my life comes with me as well, transformed. And that means the sheep too. And every blade of grass you've ever walked on with your bare feet, every sunset you've ever watched, every raindrop that's ever hit you on the nose or in the eye is somehow going to be with you in the next life.
Yeah, I think that's crucial. It's not the most popular opinion when we think of only humans have immortal souls. However, all of creation from a biblical point of view, which is usually where I'm focusing, is implicated.
That's right.
Romans 8, the whole creation is groaning, right? And you see this in the church documents. Vatican II has lines about it. The last three popes have all talked about it. Ratzinger even talks about the transubstantiation, quote unquote, of creation, right? So that some change is effected in that creature that we will not know until we get to heaven. One thought Jen and I have, though, is, okay, there's currently, at this very moment, a hog sitting on the smoker at my house for us to eat.
I've done that too.
And I believe that we are transforming that pig in some way and elevating it. And so the difference between it getting eaten by a pack of wolves, which is also natural, and us doing it, it's not like the pig is thereby brought to heaven by that, but the roasting of coffee grounds, the pig being smoked, right? All these things. And that actually leads to the next question I wanted to ask you, which is, all the evil or apparent evil, all the suffering in creation, right? That indeed that being has to be crushed. The grain of wheat, Christ says in John 12:14, I believe, has to fall to the earth and die, right? Some people, Balthasar, Benedict, they speak of the kind of Paschal or Trinitarian structure of creation.
They do.
And I want us to go into that a bit, just to riff on the idea of what's the deal with all of this suffering? How does this fit into God's plan?
Well, you've asked two great questions, two separate questions, really. One's about the problem of evil, which is ultimately, in my view, an unanswerable question completely and satisfactorily in this life. I will say, at least with regard to that question of suffering, that I think the main thing that the Christian needs to avoid is offering, like Job's friends, overly facile explanations. Well, this bad thing happens because of X, Y, Z, or even the classic free will argument. It works. You know, God is in His permissive will allows for a certain amount of suffering we inflict on each other because you have to do that to allow for free will. Okay, fine. Does that really ultimately satisfy everything? Does that explain some of the most horrific evils that we've ever perpetrated upon each other? Couldn't God have had Hitler die in a car wreck when he was 5? I mean, these are things, you know, people die in car wrecks all the time. In the words of Tevye and Fiddler on the Roof, would it wreck some vast eternal plan? All right, if God had slightly altered the course of history in order to mitigate some of the sufferings of the more horrific sort. So these are ultimately superficial answers in some ways that are trite, and I think it helps us to cope with the sufferings in some way. But I'm a big believer in the fact that we know actually very little about why it is that God permits suffering, other than the fact that we know that ultimately it's going to redound to our good. And that can sound kind of pietistical as well. But what's the other option? The other option is that God doesn't exist or that God is evil himself. And for a lot of good reasons, we reject those two things. So we have to be, C.S. Lewis does really well with this. We have to be committed. God exists. God is infinitely good. There is evil. What we do with that third piece is critical. And not to overanalyze it, but to simply say, we know one thing, that God has not exempted himself from the implications of that evil. He has entered into that evil and descended into it and suffered through it. So ours is not an absentee landlord God. The tenement in which we live might have rats and roaches, but God is living there too.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's part of the answer. Now, but that does then segue a little bit into the other part of your question, which is death. There is a Paschal mystery at the heart of our corporeality, our materiality, our living in an embedded material world. Balthasar says there's a kenotic element. Our mere finitude as material beings means that some kind of death is a natural part of everything that we go through. Because finitude combined with the passage of time means that things are constantly going into existence and dying and being replaced by something else. And that allowing yourself to die and to be replaced by something else is a form of kenosis. It's a form of divestment. And Balthasar says you see this all the way down the chain of a material existence. And he says, I don't think that he thinks it's simply because of evil. He thinks that this is a constitutive part of being a material person in time, that there is going to be this kenosis, and that does mirror the kenosis of the Trinity. I've recently been reading a lot of this French phenomenologist, Emmanuel Falck. I don't know if you've...
No, I've not read him.
Yeah, he's dense. He's not an easy read. And oftentimes when you read European authors, you're trying to figure out who it is they're really talking to, because they're reading other European authors of which you're not familiar, so you're going, okay, he's talking about somebody here, I don't know who it is. But his phenomenology says this, that our corporeality involves death. Death isn't just the result of sin. There is a dying element in just finitude and corporeality. Remember, he's a phenomenologist, and our experience of our corporeality involves this kenosis, this death. And that that is an important thing to remember as we appreciate our role as priestly intercessors and effectors in our relationship with the natural world. The natural world is not all butterflies and rainbow unicorns. Okay? The universe is also about rattlesnakes and Ebola. Right?
Yeah.
You know.
And even the butterfly essentially liquefied itself in order to become a butterfly.
That's right. That's right. Exactly. It involved the kenotic transformation of that caterpillar. And then what comes out later is amazing.